Welcome to the Upper Room at St Clement's Church, Manchester. Join us as we discuss the Bible, theology and life.
Hello. Welcome back to the Upper Room. Thank you so much for joining us. Paul Jump, how are you?
Very well, Henry. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Had a bit of a half-term break. Did you have a good half-term?
It was good, yeah. It was a good break. I had a couple of days off, and then I was at a meeting talking about the future of the Church of England. And I think the Church of England does have a future. So,
Any more information you want to give our Upper Room listeners?
only that there are so many good and faithful people in the Church of England who love the Word of God, who want to see the gospel of Jesus Christ go out, and who will unite with others and want to unite with others who feel and believe the same stuff, even if our expression of our faith is slightly different.
And you prayed at the evening service yesterday, acknowledging that we are in a divided church, but there are people in it who do want to hold on to the gospel.
That's true. We are. And it's about 50-50, really. And half the church would like to change the church's teachings and direction, and half the church don't. And the half that doesn't is the half that's growing, and that where exciting things are happening and where the Lord is working. And the other half is in decline.
Great. Yeah. Brilliant. Not brilliant that the other half's in decline, but as in thank you for sharing that with us. I'm also aware that this in itself, this conversation could be a whole...
It's a whole podcast.
Yeah.
Yes, and also not every listener to the podcast who probably wants to listen to this at this moment in time, because we're supposed to be looking at Leviticus.
We're looking at Leviticus, and in the spirit of yesterday's sermon, Paul Jump, do you like chicken's feet?
Do you know, I quite like chicken's feet. As one person said to me after the service yesterday, it's more for the sauce. Okay. The sauce on the chicken's feet is really nice. It's like a chili sauce that you have in dim sum. But the actual chicken's feet themselves, there's not a lot of meat on, and they're very bony. So hundreds of bones in them, so you're always spitting them out. But the sauce is really good. So I don't mind chicken's feet. Some people don't like chicken's feet.
Some people say they're unclean.
Some people say they're unclean, definitely. Yes.
And so we're thinking about this idea of clean and uncleanness, and how in the Old Testament some foods were declared unclean and some were declared clean. And you said that we actually all have that tendency today.
Yes, and in fact our tendency today is that not, and I should have made more of this maybe. There's a few things I wanted to make more of. It's 5 chapters is a lot on a topic which... let's be honest, I've not really studied much in the past, chapters 11 to 15 of Leviticus.
You did well.
I don't think many of us have spent much time studying it and meditating on it. We think Jesus has fulfilled it, and that's that.
I spoke to someone yesterday who said he's been a Christian for 50 years, in church for 50 years. That's the first sermon he'd heard on those passages. And
there's 5 passages, and they're near the centre of the Pentateuch. We'll come to that next week. But... it's all about being clean. That's what all 5 chapters are about. And they come on the back of, I didn't mention this, so much I didn't mention. Nadab and Abihu were struck down by God.
Chapter 10?
Chapter 10, verses 1 to 3, they're struck down by God because they offered false fire, strange fire. Not quite sure what that means. Whether it's unauthorized in some way, whether they tried to get into the Holy of Holies, which I think is probably true. That's probably what they tried to do. But more of that next week. But they were struck down because they transgressed, they'd broken the boundary, and an unclean person who does that is struck down. And we're all unclean by nature. Even the priests were unclean by nature. And so that's what these cleanliness laws were there to teach. They were there to say there are some things in life that are clean, some things that are unclean, and God designated what those were to try to show us that we are unclean. And yet we need to be clean if we're going to approach God, if we're going to be in his presence, if we're going to be fit for him. And so that's what all the food laws were about. That's what the skin diseases were about, the childbirth laws in chapter 12 and the bodily discharges in chapter 15, which are a bit disgusting, talking about them all. But it's all to try to show us and to train the people in the Old Testament that they need to be clean. God has saved them and rescued them from Egypt that they might be a clean people. And what does it mean to be clean? It means to do these things and not do these other things.
We've got loads of questions, so I think we can shape our discussion around those questions. I think this first question leads on quite well from what you were saying. If the things mentioned in these passages are a sign of our uncleanness, so this question says, if period, sex and childbirth are unclean, does that mean they're sinful?
That is a wonderful question, and the answer is no. So the laws around clean and unclean animals, childbirth, skin disease, whether in a person or in clothing or in houses, all of discussed in chapters 13 and 14, or the bodily discharges, none of them are sinful. It's not sinful in and of itself to eat a lizard, one of the swarming things which you weren't allowed to eat.
But not advisable.
I don't know, or snake, or I know some cultures. Anyway,
that's my version of an unclean.
But it's that's
dog as well. Like some countries eat dog, don't they? And
they do.
I digress.
Yes. Well, you're going back to the kind of we all have clean and unclean ideas of what's clean and unclean in life in general, and food, people, everything. But none of these clean and unclean things are by themselves sinful. None of them. And so what it's trying to get across is not sin as we know it. Because sin as we know it is missing the mark. That's what sin is. You throw a dart at a bullseye, you slightly miss, you it's imperfection. And none of us get it right. We are all sinful. We all sin. But what it's trying to get across is that by nature we are all unclean. And that uncleanness in human beings is expressed or affects the world around us. And so the world around us is unclean because we are unclean. So what comes out from us is unclean. And so it's interesting with the skin diseases. I think there's one skin disease where if you have got a patch of leprosy, you are unclean. But if you got a particular skin disease and it's a patch, you're unclean. But if it's all of you, you're not unclean. And you're like, well, what's going on there? And it's all to do with stuff that is normal and stuff which is abnormal. The same with the clean and unclean animals. Animals that conform to the norm are designated as clean. Animals that go away from the norm are unclean. And so in the sea, if you've got scales and fins like fish, they're clean. If you're an eel, you're unclean. And so there's and then when it comes to bodily discharges, they come from your body. You're unclean, and then therefore stuff that comes from you is unclean because you're unclean. So these things aren't sinful, but because they're an expression of us, we are unclean. Even in the area of reproduction, which is a wonderful blessing, but it's unclean. When a child is born, you're passing on to that child your uncleanness. But
in what way does this overlap with the idea from Genesis 3 of the curse? Like childbirth is cursed in Genesis 3. It's not saying that to have a child is sinful, but it's saying that childbirth is cursed because it's painful and etc.
That's exactly it. And it's cursed in so many ways. It's cursed because of pain, and it's dangerous for women. But by default, you're bringing in a sinner into the world. And so the uncleanness is being passed on. That child that's born is going to be subject to decay and to sin and to death. And so this is all showing that. And it's trying to show it because there's a big question about God has struck down Nadab and Abihu. Why? Because they're unclean. And so there's a big question, how on earth can cleansing happen? And so there's some washing rituals and waiting rituals and sacrifice rituals to get you back into the state of cleanliness. But it still asks a massive question of, how is it possible to approach God? And then we come to Leviticus 16, which we'll come to next week.
Yes, excited.
So those things are not sinful.
Okay,
but in the Old Testament, they made you unclean. There is some other... and there's so much I left on the study floor. So much. Take Genesis 15 with these things around being clean and unclean regarding reproduction. It would also have... having those laws in your society would have an impact on sexual activity. Because if after sexual activity you are unclean until the evening, then you can't leave your house until the evening, and so more sexual activity then would therefore occur in an evening. The same with and so that would restrict it because you go to your own house in an evening, and so things like that. Or if a woman at the time of the month was unclean, and you as a young guy don't know which women are clean and which women are unclean, it would restrain you approaching them. It would offer some protection for women, and because you won't want to then be unclean, because you couldn't approach other people, you couldn't approach God, and so there's lots of positive benefits, moral benefits to these laws, but that's not primarily why they're there. And the same with the food laws. Maybe there was some health benefits to not eating pig back then. Although if you do leave your sirloin steak out in the sun for a week, it's going to go off a bit. So it's not entirely true that they were there for health reasons, but I think there might have been some health benefits from these things in an unscientific age. Same with skin diseases. So there are those kind of things. But at the end of the day, it's about what God designates as clean and unclean, and it's about our relationship with Him.
So the next question is directly on from that. Was God's decision to make certain food clean and unclean an arbitrary way to test a person's obedience rather than being grounded in anything tangible? So,
yes and no. It is primarily about obedience. And so you would keep the food laws out of obedience to God, not because you understood them. However, that doesn't mean they're completely arbitrary. Like I said yesterday, if a land animal, if it parted the hoof and chewed the cud, it was clean. And so there was a general pattern. Same with the fish, as I just mentioned. Same with the birds. So scavengers, birds of prey, flying insects, all unclean. Mm-hmm. But other birds and hopping insects are clean. So it's about conforming to the norm. And swarming things that swarm on the ground, snakes, lizards, mice and rats will be counted in this. Presume slugs will be counted in this, and snails. They're all unclean. All of them. Whether that's because of the curse back in Genesis, on the ground you'll slither. I don't know. Anyway, so there are some reasons why God gives these things. And I'm sure health reasons in the skin diseases. There might be some reasons to help women around childbirth, but those aren't the main things. The main reason is for obedience.
I've read, and you're welcome to tell me that I'm wrong and a complete heretic, but I've heard in the laws about clothing. Is that chapter 11?
13 and 14.
13 and 14 laws about clothing, that there's the bits about only wearing garments of made of one material, not sewn together, and that being to represent Israel as not being divided, but being wholly devoted to the Lord. Is that kind of thing helpful, or is that a bit reading into stuff a bit too much?
I think he's reading into it a little bit too much. I think all of these things were separating Israel out from other people. And we all do this, like I said about clean and unclean. We all have stuff which we think is clean and stuff which we think is unclean, and that separates us from people who are different. And so if I think that eating chicken's feet is unclean, and so everybody, I suppose meat's a good example. You know, if you think eating meat's unclean, you only eat vegetables, then you won't eat with people who eat meat. Or even on a more simpler scale, you know, if you eat, you know, if chips is your basic type of food, then people who like rice as a basic type of food might not eat with you. People who like pounded yam as a basic type of food might not eat with people who like rice. And so food separates us. But here he's saying clothing separates us. Skin diseases and what we look like, it separates us. And it's all this being set apart for God. You know, that's what's at the base of the cleanliness laws. God is holy, and in order to approach him, we need to be clean.
And okay, this is great. For time, I'm going to move us on to the next question, which says, unclean food comes with a command not to eat it. Natural bodily functions also make you unclean, but cannot be avoided. So are there different types of uncleanness?
Yes, there are. And you're right in terms of, you know, bodily functions, skin diseases, childbirth. They make you unclean, and yet they can't be avoided in the same way that avoiding eating certain meats. Yes, I think that's right. Although I suppose you can accidentally eat certain meats or whatever, or accidentally touch certain things, but it's a bit more deliberate, is that? But yes, in terms of the, but it's interesting. So we read about these bodily functions, and yet, you know, actually, if people got married younger and had children, had more children than we do today, and breastfed for longer, then women wouldn't have as many periods, and and sexual activity would be, you know, more frequent for guys, particularly from a younger age. You know, the whole way of life was different. So yes, but yes, they're right in terms of some things can't be avoided and some things you can. That
just side point is really interesting, because it's so easy to read this and imagine how it, and our natural instinct is to imagine how that might fit, but through our cultural lens. And it's so important to remember that this was a completely different world, and that's just a helpful lens with which to view this passage. You were going to chime in. This is making me think, this is a slightly side point, but this is emphasising what a big deal Acts chapter 10 is, when Peter goes to stay with these Gentiles and Cornelius is commanded to kill and eat. You mentioned Mark chapter 7 in your sermon, Jesus declaring all foods clean. That again, as New Testament readers, it's easy to miss what a massive deal that is, and just the amazing fact that Jesus has made all foods clean.
Yeah, it is. And it would have been shocking for Peter. 1,500 years of these rules, and Peter's then told, you know, eat unclean stuff. He's like, what? I just can't do that. I remember a little anecdote. I remember being in North Africa. I was in Morocco, and I got chatting to some guys who were camping, some Muslims who lived in Morocco, and you know, we got friendly, and they invited me to stay for lunch in the tent, and they had this huge pot of it was some sort of chicken stew, which was fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and they got some French baguettes, freshly baked, And we all were, basically what you did is you got your French baguette, you dipped it in, you picked up one of these bits of chicken, and you ate it like that. And at one point, I for whatever reason, I don't know, I dipped in to the pot. This is towards the end of the meal, actually. I dipped into the pot with my left hand, with a bit of bread, and it was interesting because there was hardly anything left. There was one piece of chicken left, and the guys all said to each other, "Who wants this last piece of chicken?" None of them wanted it. None of them wanted to touch the pot because I touched it with my left hand. And so as soon as they saw that, I'm like, I wash my hands. I wash my hands a lot, and I don't use my left hand for
It's a hygiene thing, right?
Yeah, it's a complete hygiene thing in that culture, and so they were horrified. That's as close as I've got to Acts chapter 10. The horror of, I can't do that. That's just disgusting.
I have a story like that from university. And when I was at university, I used to buy this very cheap mince, really cheap, wonderful stuff. Makes spag bowl, and it was around the time that it came out that a lot of these supermarkets were buying horse mince.
Oh yes, okay.
And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wonderful wife, said, I'm not coming to eat in your house while you've got that stuff in your house. She's a vegetarian, but she was like, I'm not having you buying horse mince. But even some of my friends were like, nah, I'm not eating your spag bowl where it's made of horse. And I was like, oh. So, I kept the horse mince myself. And
the French eat horse, don't they?
Yeah, I guess it was fine. Tasted just the same.
Yeah,
mince,
the French
really.
think it's quite nice, I think. Yeah. And there's other cultures that eat horse.
Yeah. It was a big scandal, wasn't it, in our country?
But that's because we think it's disgusting to eat horse. But there's other stuff which we might eat or somebody else might. I remember inviting an Indian family over to our house for dinner, and it was wonderful with them. And so they invited us over to theirs for dinner, and it was absolutely wonderful. And we had to eat with their hands. It was anyway, it's delicious. We invited them back for Sunday lunch. So they gave us curry and rice. We gave them roast beef, Yorkshire puddings, and everything. Well, the idea for them of eating a big piece of beef, and the cow's sacred in India, and so many Christians, even if they don't honour their cow in a particular way, don't eat it. They were like, they just didn't touch it. Yeah, sure. And I'm like, that's the best bit. And it hadn't dawned on us. So there is this kind of clean and unclean mindset, but yes, go on. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. It's radical for Peter in Acts chapter 10, and radical for Jesus in Mark chapter 7 when he says this and he makes all foods clean. And the Pharisees are just beside themselves. They're like, who are you? But he's God. He can do that. Yeah. And he can designate some things clean and unclean which weren't. But the reason he can do it is not just because he's God, but because he fulfills these things.
Yeah. And as you mentioned really helpfully, he is the only one who can come into contact with uncleanness and not be made unclean himself. In fact, he brings restoration and renewal to the leper and the woman with the issue of blood, which is amazing.
Yeah, this is fantastic, isn't it?
And so in light of that, Jesus fulfilling the law, which of these laws should we keep and which ones should we not?
What a great question.
Which Old Testament laws should we keep and which should we not?
Brilliant. That is a fantastic question.
And feeds into some wider cultural questions as well, about ethics and things like that.
Oh, huge. So, honestly, this is that's a question for about 20 podcasts. This is my very brief summary of it. Jesus fulfills all the laws in the Old Testament, and so to apply any law in the Old Testament to your life today, you need to go through Jesus. I'll say that again. Jesus fulfills all the laws in the Old Testament, every single one. So to then keep that law today, or to see how it applies today, you need to take you through Jesus. And so that's true for the moral laws. The moral laws being the Ten Commandments, straight, as it were. Now, should we keep the Ten Commandments today? Yes, but you keep them through Jesus. I'm not going to go through all the different implications of that, but I'll give you one, which is for the fourth commandment, the Sabbath commandment. I don't think any Christian today would say that we need to keep the Sabbath, a Saturday, the last day of the week, as the day of rest and worship. That you have to do that. Why? Because you've got to take these laws through Jesus. Now, I think that when you do that, you end up with the principle that on the first day of the week, you meet to worship. You put down your tools, you rest from your work, and you worship the Lord. And the first day of the week is a Sunday, no longer a Saturday. And that's because that's the day Jesus rose from the dead. That's the day that the early church started meeting, because Jesus rose from the dead on that first day. And so you're taking that law through Jesus. The same with these laws. And so if I preached that sermon again that I preached yesterday, I would spend more time thinking about how the big sets of laws, food, childbirth, skin disease, bodily discharges, how they apply to us today. I tried to do a bit of that at the end of the sermon, and that maybe it wasn't very long. So, for example, with the food laws, we can eat what we like. The New Testament's clear with that again and again. There are no restrictions on the food that we eat. None. However, we are not therefore, when we come to eat food, we're not therefore absent of any law and principle. As Paul talks about in Corinthians, it's the law of love. And so if eating meat is going to cause your Jewish friend to stumble, or your even Christian friend, or whoever to stumble,
vegetarian wife
to stumble, then you don't eat it. If somebody thinks it's been, this is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9, if someone thinks it's been offered to idols, and they go like, oh, that means I've got to engage in idol worship. No. So you don't eat it. And so, but likewise, if you are, evangelizing Gentiles like Peter was doing and ministering with them, you eat with them. You don't separate yourself off and say, I'm not going to eat your bacon butties with you anymore. I'm going to eat just Jewish food because some Jews have come here and I want to. You don't do that. And so, and I also mentioned about crossing cultures, because food separates people. It does today, and we all have our own types of food, and this is the way we eat, and this is how we eat and stuff. And as Christians, we go across those boundaries and say, I'm going to eat food which I maybe wouldn't choose to eat and like, for the gospel, to form friendships, to talk to people about Jesus. This is what missionaries do. Or good, healthy missionaries do.
I think I'm going to use Beth as an example, and I think she does this. She gets a balance really well in that when we're having people over for food, where she can, she will say we're having sausages, and she knows people who are coming would really appreciate some meat sausages. She will cook meat sausages, even though it's not her preference, even though it wasn't what she would eat. We had some people over once who we just knew that their thing was to have a Sunday roast, and that would be normal for them, and to have that in our house would make them feel welcome. And she went to Aldi and brought a chicken in a bag. She didn't have to touch it. She didn't really, understandably, really want to do that, but she stuck it in the oven because it was a welcoming thing to do. And I think that's without compromising her convictions, she was able to move towards people and show hospitality, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And I told the story yesterday lunchtime of a woman who was being welcomed as a lecturer at my old theological college, and she's from Australia. So of course, in the middle of summer, they put on a barbecue, and then the following a few days later, she was invited to another barbecue and ate that as well. And then on the third day, they had a barbecue, and someone said, "Oh, we haven't asked you if there's anything you don't eat," and she just said, "Well, I don't eat meat." And it's like, "But you've eaten meat at 2 barbecues." He said, "Well, I was just being polite." So there is that sense of, I don't want to offend people, and so I will eat stuff which I don't want to eat, or even stuff which I think that's going to make me that stuff's going to give me a dodgy stomach probably, but I've got to do it, So
that's the reason I like peas. It's because I had my grandparents used to give them to us all the time, and in the end I was like, just gotta get them down me.
Yeah, I was brought up like that. Anyway, I was brought up to some extent, but this is good. This is crossing cultures, and I think with childbirth, how does that apply to us today? I just think, I mentioned yesterday, Book of Common Prayer used to have a Thanksgiving for childbirth service. It was like a kind of purifying of the mother, but basically it was thanking God for a safe delivery for the mother and for the baby. And I just think we need to make more of that. I know in Nigerian Anglican culture, that's what they do. And I've been around to a few houses because they expect that to happen. I think that's wonderful. Now, in African culture, it is more risky. Childbirth is more risky than for women than it is in this country, amongst Europeans. I don't know why, but I was talking to somebody and said, the mortality rate's higher. So I just think we need to make more of that. Then when it comes to the skin diseases, I just think Jesus, he crosses those boundaries and brings cleansing. And so instead of ostracizing people who are different, who look different, we embrace the difference. We move towards illness and disease and try and find ways to heal and try and find ways to reconcile and to bring people in. That's what the gospel does. It doesn't say, you look different than me, you belong over there, you're unclean. And there are cultures that do that. And then finally with the bodily discharges, Hebrews 13 gets it right. He bangs it on the head, where he says, the writer says, keep the marriage bed undefiled. And that phrase, undefiled, he's using imagery, he's using language taken straight from Leviticus 15. That's how to apply Leviticus 15 to our lives today. It is, not saying that any of these bodily discharges makes you sinful. It's saying, make sure your bed is clean by the way that you, both your attitudes, your language, and your behaviour around sex. Make sure that's clean. And if you do that, you will stand out as different than our culture, because our culture, our culture. What's the best word to use? Makes sex a dirty thing. It's Christians and biblical views of sex that really honour it. Honour it as clean. So those are. That would be. So I would, if I'd have had my time again preaching the sermon, I'd have spent much more longer pressing in on those things.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. Go on, Karen.
Yes. So going back to this big, massive question, take all the laws through Jesus. The general principle then is that moral laws we do keep today, with a few, like with the Sabbath thing. Few changes around. The ceremonial laws we don't keep today in the ceremonial form, but we apply them today.
They would be things. Ceremonial would be things like sacrifices.
Ceremonial being things like these laws.
Oh, okay.
So rituals around the sacrificial system.
Okay.
Yeah. So we keep these laws today, chapters 11 to 15, through Jesus. And then the national laws, or the civil laws, for want of a better word, we take and we say, well, are there principles here that we can apply as a nation in relation to other nations, in relation to good governance and peace in our own nation? And if so, How? That's a massive question. And maybe that's worth just 20 podcasts itself. So
it's a massive topic, isn't it, that people have spilt lots of ink over for good reason. Is where we see these laws carried over by the moral laws carried over by Jesus, is that in things like the Sermon on the Mount, where he restates things like, if you look at a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery with her? Is that the kind of the move we make in Scripture? Is it more nuanced than that?
Yeah, no, I think, yes, I think in terms of through Jesus, it is keeping these things in accordance with what he teaches, but it's also in terms of his life, because he gives us his Spirit that we might keep the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. So yeah, he talks about that a bit in the Sermon on the Mount, but it's the attitude of heart. So it's not just a case of, not killing your neighbour. It's a case of actively pursuing your neighbour's good and loving them, and specific ways in doing that. So yeah, it's that sort of thing again and again.
And I guess in the new covenant is that we are given new hearts, and we are given the Spirit within us, as you say, that empowers us to keep the law, which is completely different from the old covenant. We've just looked at 2 Corinthians. The letter kills, but the Spirit gives life and empowers us to keep what God has commanded.
Yeah, that's right. And it is interesting, because there is that principle in the Old Testament of the Spirit giving life and the Spirit empowering you to keep the laws. But in the Old Testament, there was because as a nation you were to be separate from the other nations, set apart for God. There was this division inherent in society, and so the foreigners were your enemies because you interacted with them. They made you ritually unclean. You couldn't interact with other believers. You couldn't interact with God, and so you'd be separate from them. Whereas Jesus says, no, you've heard it said, love your neighbour, hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies, do good to them that hate you. Why? Because that's the sort of thing that God does. And now that I've come, there isn't this us and them. And even in the Old Testament, Israel was meant to be a light to the nations, but so often, for various reasons, they were at war with the nations.
We've talked at length about Jonah, who was very anti-Gentile and very pro-Israel.
Yes, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
We've got two more questions. Why does the birth of a daughter require 2 weeks instead of only 1 week for a son? From chapter 12.
Don't know. Sorry, the person who's got vested interest in this.
Yes.
I don't know whether it's because of circumcision and the fact that blood is there's a sense in which blood is sacrificed at on the 8th day. So whether that's the case, whether it's just the case that God in the law is trying to show that boys and girls are different, even though they're equal. They both make a mum unclean, but they're different, and so there's different rules around it. Sorry, can't do more than that.
I know, that's cool. That's cool. Last question.
Well, I should say this isn't the only place in the laws where it distinguishes the rules around boys and around girls, and I just think men and women are different. That's just there in the laws. It's there in society. Anyway.
Yeah. You said in the sermon, equal but different. If children are born sinful and guilty, this is the last question. What does it mean for children who are stillborn or die very young? Are they in heaven?
What a massive question. Well, we've wrestled through this before with death of children here at church, death of your Judah. We are all unclean, and so we all need to be made clean if we're going to access God's presence. What does that mean for children who die in infancy? Well, I think the Bible is very clear that the children of believers who die in infancy are cleansed because they're covered by the blood of Christ and the promises of God in the new covenant. And so I think that's clear in 1 Corinthians 7, where it says that a believing, where there's a couple and one of the couple is a believer and one isn't, the children are made holy.
That's covenant language. That's set apart language, isn't it?
Yeah, and the same in the Old Testament. You know, the children of believers, part of the covenant community, they are holy people because the parents are holy. So we have this real individualism today where we go, you know, I'm a Christian, but my children are not Christians. To which the answer is, no, they're believers as well. You know, they might have childlike faith. They might not even be able to express faith because they're 2 hours old. But, you know, they're part of the covenant community, even in the womb. You know, when Elizabeth is pregnant with John the Baptist, the baby jumps in the womb when Mary, with Jesus in her womb, approaches. So, and so children of believers, without any doubt whatsoever, will be in heaven. Children of unbelievers, I don't know. The Bible's silent. But I believe God is a merciful and a gracious God, and always does what's right.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And the other passage I might go to is David losing his child, and there's an expectancy. David stops praying and fasting once his child dies, and he says, I always get the wrong round. He's not going to come to me, but I will one day go to him. There seems to be implicit in there that expectation that David stopping praying for his child because his hope is now that one day he will see that child again.
Yeah. There's a big distinction between believers and unbelievers in the Old Testament, and we see that in the Book of Acts. When on the day of Pentecost, Peter says, "And the promises to you and to your children, but also to all who are far off, as many as the Lord our God shall call." So, yeah, that's one of the reasons why we baptize children. Yeah. In the sure, and because they're part of the covenant community, and we want to give them the sign of that. But anyway, that's another discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been lots of discussions, things we brought up today that could be a whole podcast in themselves. We have had a long episode, but some really great questions. So thank you, everyone, for sending those questions in.
Just as an aside, there was a question about the totally unrelated to the passage about the catechism. But if children are part of the covenant community, and we have a catechism slot which is specifically dedicated to teaching them, it's good for us as well. We're all part of the same community. We might not be children, but we should listen.
Absolutely.
Engage with that part of the service.
This time tomorrow?
Seek to live a clean life. And if you feel dirty in any way, come back to Jesus. Let him wash you clean.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jumpy. Thank you for your work on the passage. It was 4 chapters.
5,
sorry. I don't undermine.
The long chapters as well. And honestly, some of that stuff is just like...
Yeah. It was an intense topic, but thank you for bringing that to us, and thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Do catch up with Jumpy's sermon and the rest of the series on YouTube or the church website, and we'd also love to see you on a Sunday morning at 10:30 or Sunday evening at 6:30. But wherever we see you, catch you soon. Goodbye.
God bless.